It's my pleasure now to introduce Jeff Cyphers, the CEO of Sonoma Clean Power. Jeff has a rich background in energy and sustainability, and I can say that when he became CEO of Sonoma Clean Power, something that we had worked on for so long, I was ecstatic. I just knew that we had somebody to lead this new entity of ours to success, and indeed that's what's happening. So Jeff, would you please come up?
Morning. This is a fantastic event. Thank you to Ann Hancock and Barry Vester and the rest of the Center for Climate Protection. I'm going to proclaim that I think today is a turning point. It's a turning point from this is an idea. I remember when Marin launched and their success was explained as a fluke, and then Sonoma launched and we thought, it's just those liberal hippies up in the North Coast. And then Lancaster launched and everyone's like, what the heck is going on here? And this is really happening now. I think that we've gotten from it's impossible to it's inevitable. And now it's time to do it right. So it's my incredible privilege to introduce our panel. Commissioner Carla Peterman is here today, and she joins us from the California Public Utilities Commission, where she leads such important matters as energy efficiency, the renewables portfolio standard, electric cars, energy storage, and some major rate cases. She's also served on the California Energy Commission and advised on policy at the UC Energy Institute, and done earlier work on energy finance at Lehman Brothers. We expect to call her doctor later this year, and when she completes her PhD on photovoltaic markets and policy and financial incentives at Berkeley. So she's really passionate about sustainably pursuing clean energy. We're also honored to have Angelina Galiteva from the California Independent System Operators Board of Governors here today. She's founder of the Renewables 100 Policy Institute and served as Executive Director for Strategic Planning at LADWP, overseeing renewables. And Ms. Galiteva is an environmental and energy attorney focused on renewable energy and distributed energy technologies. She serves as the chair of the World Council for Renewable Energy and founder of NE Options, a renewable energy and new technology product design and project development firm. And she's passionate to achieve 100% renewable energy for all human purposes, including transportation. So I think Russ teed that up pretty well this morning. Community choice is a general purpose localization of finance, of control, of solving climate issues, and we can definitely contribute to accelerating those solutions. And our moderator, Jeff Byron, is here today. He's an expert on emerging clean energy technologies as a member of Silicon Valley's Band of Angels. And he recently served on the California Energy Commission as well. He's had a broad career from GE to NRG, from Calpine to manager of research at EPRI, and as energy director at Oracle. He's currently an advisor to the Center for Climate Protection. And please join me in welcoming this very distinguished panel.
Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Byron. Just checking the time. We have about an hour, and I'm really looking forward to this. It's such a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to interview and to help you get to know what these two lovely ladies do and why they do it and why it's important to all of us in this room. It's such a pleasure that it's a different situation to have public service like this. Yeah, I'm thinking back to the debate last night when we were talking about the size of the fingers of men, and here we are. We have two incredible public servants who have been involved in energy issues for most of your careers, which isn't very long. So let's do this. Let's get to know them just a little bit before we start asking them some questions about community choice energy and about what they do. Commissioner, I didn't have a chance. I was just thinking this is about 5 years ago that you were appointed to energy.
Correct, yes.
Just about the day.
Yes, about to the day.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what got you into public service. Maybe something that goes maybe back as far as childhood that has influenced you in terms of thinking about serving the public in this way.
Thank you. Of course, this is not one of the questions on the sheet that Jeff gave us. And first, let me just say thank you for including me in this forum. what a great turnout. I think it really is a signal about the interest in CCEs and glad to give a CPUC perspective on what's going on. Also, kudos to the event organizers for these pillows in the chair. Doing lots of conferences, this is probably the most comfortable seat I've had in a while, and so you're already on the right track. So what inspired me or encouraged me to get into this work? Well, if I go back to probably the most fundamental influence for me that goes back to childhood, was when I was 16, I had a little brother, and he was in college at the time. And around Christmas, he came home for the holiday break, and he did two things for me. First, he gave me as a present Aldo Leopold's Sam County Almanac, which some of you may have read. And it was a really great series of essays about the relationship between man and nature. And one of my big takeaways from that book was the unintended consequences of human interaction. And what we do to nature has consequences, good and bad. And so that's really been a fundamental part of how I approach my work and regulation, which is thinking about what are some of the consequences of action, knowing everything has action, and being mindful that everything works in the system. The other thing that he did was that he shared with me a paper he'd written for school on Love Canal, New York, and the environmental issues happening in Love Canal, and the interaction of politics, legal issues, and science. And at the time, I was thinking about applying to college, and I was interested in science, but also very much interested in social issues. And so that inspired me to think about going into environmental law at the time is what I was interested in doing. Ended up studying history and environmental science in college, and then my path took a different direction where I ended up focusing on environmental management and economics. But I would give my brother the credit for influencing me to go into this space.
That's excellent. Mr. Peterman joined the Energy Commission 5 years ago, and in an unprecedented move, the governor really was so impressed with what she was doing there, he moved her to the Public Utilities Commission. Which one do you like better?
I like them both.
No, you'll have to go in further.
I'll just make this point. I was very happy at the Energy Commission, and the work that happens there is phenomenal. The reason that I accepted this appointment, even though, as I said, my grandmother, same salary, same title, more hassle, and she didn't quite understand why I would make the decision to move. But when I was at the Energy Commission, I happened to lead on the 2012 Integrated Energy Policy Report. And one of the things we did was to lay out a renewable action plan and roadmap for meeting 33% renewables. And when I looked at the series of 32 actions that we need to take as a state, some of the most critical ones I saw happening at the CPUC over the next 5 to 10 years. And so I said, if I'm really serious about this work and committed to doing it, I need to be willing to go where I think some of the action is. And so I still live in the Sacramento area and do that commute and work between San Francisco, but I have found it very rewarding, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent. And of course, when the governor asked, you say yes.
Of course. If I'm not being asked, it's assumed that I've said yes.
Ms. Galiteva, would you please tell us a little bit about what got you involved and so committed to renewables and climate issues and the ISO? I mean, and I have a second question for you, but please, any story that you'd like to tell that kind of reveals a little bit about what got you interested in this field?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you to the organizers. This is really a great event. Thank you, and you've done a phenomenal job. It has come from a situation of, first they laugh at you, then they fight you, and in the end they join. And it's an avalanche effect, and it's a good thing, because I've been through this many times. I know the work that goes into it. Energy has been a passion for me, I think, since I was, as far as I can remember. I'm originally from Eastern Europe, but I had the good fortune of growing up in West Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya. So when we lived over there, there's centralized power stations delivered power maybe 2 hours a day, and that's when we had water too, so you had to fill your bathtubs, you had to fill whatever other vessels you had with water that wasn't very clean. And you didn't have electricity, and then you were lucky to be in a school where they brought solar panels, and all of a sudden you had lights, you had water pumping, you had all kinds of good things that the solar energy brought, and it wasn't connected to the wires, it wasn't connected to anything centralized, but we got the experience very early on in grade school, and this is a source of energy that can actually work, it can bring benefits in a community that's out in the boondocks, where the roads get washed away by the annual rains every year, and you've got to have a big SUV to be able to plow through the savannah. Then I went back home to Eastern Europe, and that was a bit of a shocker because I had to wear clothes and I had to wear uniforms, and it was cold, and it was miserable, and we had power outages every day. We'd have power for 4 hours, and then you would have no power for 4 hours. So everybody rushed to get to the elevators because you didn't want to go up 12 stories to be able to get to your home because you had no power. They called it the disco of Eastern Europe. Lights on, lights off. And if you were really lucky and you were a party member, the lights in your house didn't go off. So that was kind of interesting as well. But then Chernobyl happened. And Chernobyl was a big eye-opener for me because I was always interested in international relations, international law, and how do we ensure sovereignty. And all of a sudden, there's your government making decisions of energy resources that cause transboundary pollution that respects no boundaries whatsoever, pollutes everybody equally, and nobody has any control about how that is actually managed and who pays in the end. And there's all the denial about, well, we have cancers, how many people died of the cancers, was the water polluted, did only 45 firemen die, or did the 200,000 children that developed thyroid cancer just happen out of the blue? So it was a debate that got me focused on, okay, international relations, energy. I've got to focus on energy if I really want to have some kind of an impact on what happens on a global scale, because this is the only area we need to control. Otherwise, there's no sovereignty. There's no independence whatsoever. So I decided I was going to come to the bastion of democracy in the United States and study energy. So, Eastern European children are ambitious. And in Bulgaria, they wouldn't let me study law because I was a pro-Western oriented element. Communist governments had different ideas as well. But I ended up in New York City. Long story short, it was going to law school, which was a wonderful opportunity. The oldest profession on the face of the earth. I'm not going to the debate level, but law school was lucky. I went into law school, I was accepted. First Eastern European ever, and I studied energy and environmental law. And then when I was in law school, I was focusing specifically on energy law, climate change, carbon taxes, how are we going to be able to manage it on a regulatory level? And Dick Ottinger, who was also a congressman and who was the chair of the Energy Committee, turned to me and said, listen, if you want to have an impact, you've got to work with the utility industry because you have to understand how they operate. So before I knew it, I was roped into working for the New York Power Authority, which was a lot of fun. I learned a lot because early on I started working with electric transportation, solar programs, renewable energy, and how that fits into the utility paradigm. It doesn't. It was very interesting. There's a natural backlash against renewables. Utilities did not like it. They were aggressively against it. And even though it was a small program, it was very difficult to have breakthroughs. Because I had an academic degree, and we like degrees, so I had a doctorate in law. They started doing the deregulation in California, and they were setting up the ISO and the PX Trust. So I was lucky to be able to be with the team that actually set up the ISO and the PX Trust. And early on, we said we need to have independent transmission. We need to be able to bring in resources into California. The ISO has to have the ability to be able to bring energy at an affordable price, even if the utilities don't build the transmission. Kind of doesn't happen. And that happened, and it was a lot of fun. I worked for the LA Department of Water and Power, launched their green power programs. We had more progress than New York, but there was still resistance, and it continues to this day. It's an evolving process. But what's happening in this energy revolution is all of a sudden it's a democracy for the people. The consumer is no longer only a consumer, it's a prosumer. Energy is going back and forth. People are demanding more choice, more availability, more technologies, and that's on a global scale. And all of a sudden, we're breaking down the silos between electricity, between transportation, between new construction, between heating, between cooling. We're having conversations that have traditionally never happened. And so silos within utilities are breaking, silos within agencies are breaking. We're cooperating on many levels, and it is a very exciting time. I was in Paris too, it's happening on a global scale, and what happens in California can have a tremendous impact.
Thank you. You've actually answered a few more of my questions.
I have many more details.
So let me go back to Mr. Byron. Since Marine Energy Authority started in 2010, we've seen a lot of action. You've heard about some of this as well this morning around community choice energy. Why do you think this has happened? I think we have a sense from Ms. Galiteva. How about yourself?
Well, I can give you my thoughts on this, so I'm sure those in the room who are thinking about developing a CCA can give you more insight. But I think it comes down to who do you want to have controlling your utility services and your utility? And it comes down to that question. And so I think we're seeing cities and counties pursue CCAs because they want to have more control over their utilities, sometimes for particular purposes. So it may be that you want to pursue higher levels of renewable energy or lower cost power. It could be for a host of reasons. And I think the success of Marin has also shown other cities and counties that it's possible to do it. And I have to give Marin credit because they, going out there first, really have been the leaders in terms of working with the utilities, working with the Public Utilities Commission on addressing issues as they come up. Because when CCA law was passed, it didn't foresee every particular issue and problem. And so over the last few years, I think there's been good collaborative work on working through issues like how to deal appropriately with opt-out, how to deal with code of conduct, billing, and I'm proud to say our CPUC staff is really committed to trying to work through and resolve issues informally as much as possible, even though there's a formal complaint process that hasn't been exercised yet. And I think, again, it's because when issues come up, the CCA and utilities bring them to us. One of the things that our staff, and I have to give Will McGuire, who is all things, everything at the PUC for CCAs, credit for this.
Is Will here?
Yeah, Will, why don't you stand up? Will McGuire recently instituted tri-annual meetings, so every 4 months, bringing together CPUC staff, CCA staff, IOU staff to work together, really starting to get together this group of folks who are focused on CCA issues to try to work through issues before they become big problems. And as we see the expansion of CCAs into other parts of the state, it'll be a good opportunity to bring new players in as well.
So I think we're going to hear a lot today. Thank you very much. I think we're going to hear a lot today about the pluses of community choice energy. We've heard some of it already, but we have the two of you here who see the inside operations of both grid and regulatory aspect of investor-owned utilities. What do you see as the downside for community choice energy for consumers? Are there losers when it comes to community choice energy?
Well, I mean, I can just rewind what I just said and play it again, which is also the downside. You have to run your own utility. You have local control of your utility. So it depends on if you want that or not. Managing a utility is not an easy task. And so I think, as I view it, it comes down to what do you want out of it and have you set up an infrastructure to be able to accomplish that. So if you want to have lower cost energy, do you have an infrastructure to do that? Does the market work in a way that facilitates that? If you want higher percentages of renewables, can you accommodate that? How does that look as the incumbent utilities become more green? How does that value proposition change? Do you trust your local officials? You talk about, I was glued to my TV last night watching the debates, and some of those officials I would not trust to make decisions on my energy system. And so it really comes down to what confidence you have in your city representatives and the infrastructure you create. And so I think as we see CCAs flourish, you'll see some successes and maybe some not so successes, again, depending on who are the individuals engaged.
Mm-hmm. So far, only successes. In fact, since we're recognizing people, is Don Weiss here by chance? Don is Ann Hancock's had a lot to do with this, and I also think of Sean Marshall. Is Sean here by chance? Hopefully soon. These are individuals that are really pioneered this area. All women, by the way. But we haven't seen this downside, so I'm probing to ask, do you see any downsides to community choice energy for communities other than maybe not getting the right leaderships involved?
Well, long term I see no downside, because I think when you're building something new and you're putting in new infrastructure, sure there are going to be mistakes here and there, and sure things could have gone smoother, and if you look back, 2020 hindsight, some things could have been done better and they could have been done faster. But as a whole, any time that you have a visionary program that people are behind and that people want to see and make happen and they have passion for it, that's a recipe for success. Because then they put in the infrastructure in place and they work out the infrastructure. The infrastructure may be difficult, but if you have a long-term, sustainable vision and you're working towards that goal with specific milestones in mind, you're going to reach that ultimate goal because you have a plan where you're going to be going to 20%, 30%, 40%, 60, 100% ultimately renewable energy. And I remember initially when we started with the renewable energy programs, the traditional kickback was, well, 10%, that's going to be disruptive to the grid. 20%, we're going to have massive outages. 30%, absolute failure of Armageddon is going to happen. And now we're very comfortable in saying 50% is fine. And mind you, we're not counting large hydro and distributed DG in California, which means we'll be at 60, 65% easily and moving beyond. And we're comfortable doing it as the ISO, as the grid infrastructure. I believe the utilities are comfortable doing it on the distribution side. And I think the CCAs push them a little bit further, because the CCAs can embrace all the other elements of serving a community, where you have water services, where you have internet services. The internet of everything is going to be playing a very large role in communicating and being able to enable a consumer to participate in the market. Distributed energy, distributed resources, it becomes a holistic vision that pushes you towards Paris. And that becomes very interesting and exciting, because if we can develop the blueprint here, we can leapfrog it to all the communities that are starting to develop their new infrastructure now. Not to bore everybody, but in the case, Brazil. I was just in Brazil in November. And Brazil is 80% renewable large hydro. For the first time they're having droughts. And for the first time they're having massive outages and power shortages in 11 states where they had blackouts. So the Brazilian government wanted to have an idea of how should we supplement our power system? Maybe we should develop nuclear, or maybe we should develop, fossil power. And for them to realize that, look, we already have a stable source of hydropower augmented with renewables. And you can balance those renewables with the hydropower. And we show them a slide of where the coincidence of the installation of solar power actually mitigated the drought here in California as well. So the Brazilians are now coming to California. They'll be here next week trying to learn and trying to gain technologies from us and wanting to form partnerships to where they can take this and leapfrog the technology to Brazil and have a platform that pushes them to 80, 90, 100% renewables. And that's really exciting because we've become a beacon.
Let me just build up a little bit.
Absolutely.
So, because you said be a little provocative, so maybe I'll be a little provocative. I am always inspired by Angelina's enthusiasm about where we're going. I'm going to push back though and say that we're not comfortable, I think is a strong word, with going to 50%. We're committed to it. I could pull up a nice little presentation and say otherwise.
I'll hear from the board.
I would say we are committed to going to 50% and beyond, because that's what we need to do to meet our greenhouse gas goals. But it's not going to be easy. And these are some of the challenges that we're collectively wrestling with that I think we can figure out. But how do you go to 50% renewables and beyond and safely integrate renewables? How do you do that ensuring reliability? How do you do that without having cost balloon? We know that we have technologies to help us do that. Some more costly than others. And a lot of things that we're jointly working on get to how do we lower the cost of low carbon resources like energy storage and support things like regional balancing of resources. And so when I think longer term about perhaps the collective challenge that we're going to have to address as we move forward regardless, and in particular, if you start to see CCAs become two-thirds of the state, is that right now we've had to figure out how to balance our resources, balance our generation, our transmission, our distribution resources in order to have safe, reliable power. And how does the CCA fit into that? And we've tried a couple different approaches. We're still trying a couple different approaches for how the CCA contributes to, for example, reliability concerns. And one of those approaches has been to let the incumbent utility handle some of that work, and then CCA customers pay for that. That's been, at times, met with concern. Other approaches we've taken have focused on asking the CCAs to take control over providing some of those resources. We've done some of that hybrid approach, for example, with energy storage. Each of those approaches has its pros and cons, and I don't think we have figured out yet what it means to be in a world that has majority CCAs and what that means for reliability. Do we expect CCAs to start becoming full managers of the local energy system? What should the interaction be with the broader grid? There are some benefits to connecting with a larger grid backbone. And so these are some of the real issues we're going to need to take on. And as I say this, it reminds me of some conversations I've had with folks on distributed energy over the years. That at first, when it was a little bit of distributed energy, the discussion was, how do we even get our foot in the door? But now, as that industry has matured, the conversation is, how are you going to be a responsible long-term player in provision of reliable energy services that you're not a niche market? And that's the same challenge I'll make to you as CCAs. And I think it's great that you're working together, because if you do want to eventually get to a point where you're the provider of last resort, what does that really mean? If you do want to be responsible for managing the grid and supporting resources and not having an IOU as a backbone, what does that mean? It may be a more costly venture. It doesn't mean it's not possible. I believe we can have a vision of the world where you have majority CCAs, but they're going to need to do more than CCAs currently do. And so I think those are the conversations that we need to be having as we move forward.
That's true. Nobody said it was going to be easy. Nothing grand and big is ever going to be easy, but it also doesn't mean that this is not the lowest cost, highest value development we can have long term. We all need to transition to renewables. Inevitably, that's going to happen. Now, if we plan for it, if we look at it as an opportunity, and if we say, hey, let's figure out how all these players come in together, everybody's had to grow up. The renewable energy providers have to grow up. You can't just interconnect the solar system anymore. You have to be a good green citizen. You have to provide additional services. Well, why not? More opportunity for the solar developers, more opportunity for the wind developers, more opportunity for the individual customer. Okay, I'll be a responsible electric vehicle driver. I'll let you use my battery when my car is plugged in 80% of the time, and you can charge it and discharge it whenever you want to utility, but pay me for the service. I'm very happy to do that. It gives the power to the consumer to participate in a framework that they never participated in before. And that is good for IT as well. And then for intellectual development, and this is Silicon Valley, because everything is done over the internet. So why not be able to do it, and why not participate? We have transmission owners from all of Europe come in last year, and we wanted to exchange experiences, because the Europeans have been able to integrate more renewables, and they're braver in how they do it, and maybe a little bit more brazen, and we would have thought that they would have had reliability issues. No, actually, the service systems in Europe are more reliable because of the renewables. And a lot of community development, because a lot of communities, and we've seen this, it's a grassroots movement, have basically said, hey, we want to own the wires, we're going to supply energy to our communities, and we'll export to the utilities, and the money that we make that stays in the community, we're going to use to build kindergartens, swimming pools, all kinds of good things that all of us can enjoy and share in. So it's happening, and it's an avalanche effect. We need to realize it, we need to align regulation. Regulation can be a showstopper if it's not aligned with the development. And lots of times, regulation follows technological development. So we need to make sure that we're ahead of time, we're not stopping it, and that it's moving forward. Again, long-term vision, 50%. All right, this is a floor, not a ceiling. What happens beyond? Let's start thinking about it now so we can start putting the structures into place for beyond the 50%. And that's not impossible. We have the technologies, we have the manpower, we have the know-how, we can make it happen. And I'm increasingly optimistic.
I'm still optimistic as well.
So I'm going to start taking some questions here momentarily, but I have to tell you, Ms. Galiteva, it's really wonderful, it's really refreshing to hear your voice on the ISO board now, and I'm sure there's another board member here as well today. We have new board members that are really bringing some fresh thinking to this, and it's really good. As a state, we try and push energy policy. We said we're going to go 20% renewable, 33% renewable, 50% renewable, and there are some challenges, but the can-do approach from hearing that from a board member is just really refreshing. So thank you very much.
And I'll have to thank my fellow board members. We've got phenomenally good board members on the ISO board. Mark Barron is here, and he's an absolute supporter of all the progress that we've made. And ISO staff has come a long way too.
Yes.
The ISO staff were initially, well, we have to be analytical, and we have to figure this out. And there's that school of thought too, right? It's a little bit more, well, traditional is better, and then you issue too fast to the ISO CEO saying, well, hey, we can go 100% without nuclear, and it's possible to do. There just needs to be a policy decision and a long-term plan to make it happen. So we're well on the way, and we're going to come with us.
And in fact, I'll add an editorial comment. I know a lot of the original ISO staff, and they're what we affectionately refer to as Dougs in the industry. And that's a dumb old utility guy. And so it's really wonderful to see this transition taking place, notwithstanding your concerns about reliability, but
Our concerns about reliability.
well, we all have those concerns. So let's do this. I've got a couple more questions I want to ask, and then I'm going to start turning this over to some audience questions that I'm being fed. Mr. Peterman, there are some issues that are coming up before the PUC with regard to community choice energy. One that I think a lot of people in this room are quite concerned about is, I love all these acronyms, to see if I can find out.
Let me guess, PCIA, is that
Something, so yes, this is the diligent report is for coming up, I'm assuming they came up with this. You came up with this?
Well, okay.
No,
This is the power. What is the question? Let me start with
the question is, that this is coming up before the PUC, clearly it's gone up significantly this past year. Where do you see this going? How is this going to play out for the community choice energy?
Well, let me offer a couple comments on this. So I think the acronym, the four-letter word we're all familiar with, PCIA, power charge indifference adjustment, is what this question relates to. And the power charge indifference adjustment is a mechanism. It's a mechanism about how to have the customers that are departing the incumbent utility pay for some of the costs that were incurred when they were with the utility, and how to avoid stranded costs and keep customers indifferent. And so that was the principle, and I support that principle. That's a principle that was not the PUC's principle. It was a principle that was established as a part of the legislation establishing CCAs. And so there is reasonable discussion and disagreement about how do you keep customers indifferent? How do you make sure that those stranded costs are covered somehow? And so I think we can have a thoughtful discussion about whether the PCIA and its methodology does that well and is fair. But that principle is one that I think is important to maintain. So I'll start with that comment. We passed a decision in December that adjusted upwards the PCIA charge for PG&E. And there was a lot of concern and I would say outrage from CCA customers and potential CCA customers about this. And I think one thing that customers found frustrating, but I do want to reiterate, was that that decision wasn't focused on the methodology of the PCIA. And although that wasn't my proceeding, I looked at that proceeding carefully because I got a tremendous, uniquely large number of emails and letters from people who were concerned. And looked at that and said, was the methodology followed? And from what I understand, it was. But that led to a broader question about, is this appropriate methodology? And so the commission is having a workshop on March 8th. I think it's 10 a.m. to 3, but you can check on was that right, Will? 10 a.m. to 3, Will's organizing it. On the PCIA methodology, its transparency, and that'll be a good forum to bring forward these issues. Because this will come up with every utility. A couple things to mention, though, about the discussion we had on the dais when we talked about this issue. Was one of the reasons you saw the PCIA go up is because renewable energy costs are lower now than they were when utilities initially entered these contracts. And I do think that the fact that, encouraged by the PUC and state law, that investor-owned utilities invested in renewable projects at a time when they were higher cost has been one of the factors that has led to the ability to purchase renewable energy cheaper now. So there is that tie. Something else I'll note was what I found concerning, to be frank, about a lot of the letters and emails I got from people was they said, if you care about clean energy, you'll be against the PCIA. And that's just not fair. The PCIA, and even CCA, isn't about whether you like clean energy or not. This state is one of the greenest states, it's the greenest state you'll have. And we have been leaders in clean energy, as are IRUs directed by law. And so I think if you support clean energy, you support where California is going generally. What I see as the difference about CCAs is who do you want to make those decisions? What's the pathway for getting that clean energy? How quickly do you want to move? But I don't like this pitting of ratepayers against ratepayers to say that you can only be about clean energy or distributed energy if you support CCAs. And so my call to all of you also is, again, as we mature together, to make sure that you're working with your customers and talking about the reality of why we have these things in place. Because then it'll be easier for us to work through the best solution versus having to, I think, cut through just some really false impressions about how things came to be and why we're doing it. So where are we going? I don't know, but it is embedded within any proceeding that CCAs are engaged. We're having discussions about PCIA, for example, in the energy storage proceeding. You know, some really fundamental questions about what does above market cost mean in a market that is just emerging and created? How do you think about the PCIA that is for generation resources? What does that mean for an asset like energy storage that may be generation, that may not be generation? And so your input at the CPUC is more valuable than it ever has been.
Good. So everybody should be there on March 8th.
And there's a WebEx. I will have representatives there.
Good. Did you want to add anything, Scott?
I basically believe that as we move forward and as we are looking towards integrating more renewables, we need to all work together. We need to work together on the long-term plan. I mean, with the ISO, what we realized is we bring more renewables into the grid, it's more important to have a regional collaboration and have a regional ability to be able to balance the system and transport renewables where you need them. Because one of the issues affecting costs, not necessarily reliability. We can operate the grid reliably, we can have backup, we can have excess amounts of renewables on the grid. But why incur that extra cost if we don't need it? Or why invest in very, very expensive storage until we actually need it, but we reach that 60 or 70% threshold? So being able to work together across boundary and making sure that everybody is integrated, that everybody fits seamlessly into the grid, and that we're able to export our excess renewables, because you know what one of our biggest problems is, and this should be a good problem to have. We have too much cheap or free renewable energy on the grid at certain times. And it's almost a crime to shut it off and curtail it. We don't want to curtail. We really don't want to curtail. So let's look at this as an opportunity. What can we do with that excess power? The easiest thing is use the grid, transport it where it's needed, to your neighbors or to other areas that need it. But also utilize it to do desalination, utilize it to do hydrogen, utilize it to make clean transportation fuels. That's what the Europeans are doing. And yeah, we're going to have the excess power, but cheap or free renewable power in abundance is a good thing, and I think it's an opportunity that we need to take and bring in new technologies to solve the issue. So yeah, we need to make sure that we're all aligned. We need to make sure that we have an integrated resource plan and that we don't have stranded assets, because our traditional centralized power structures are basically investments we make for 30, 40, or 50 years. So do we need that gas plant that we're building right now? I'll tell you, for capacity, maybe not, but we do need it for flexibility. So they have to be super flexible, very clean, able to meet and integrate renewables. And as we shut down Star and offline, we didn't want to, but it went offline. As we go through the once-through cooling plants on the coast, we have less than half of the gas fleet that we're going to have. But it's going to be a flexible gas fleet, and it's going to be utilized a whole lot less, but it's going to support a much greater amount of renewables coming on the grid. And why not? It's a good thing to do. Again, long-term planning, integrated resource planning between CCAs, between munis, between our neighbors, between ourselves, so we don't end up with stranded assets.
It's fun. You know, one of the things I'm looking forward to talking about integrated resource plans is that SB 350, which passed this year and increases our renewable target to 50% and doubles our energy efficiency commitment, also directs all load-serving entities, including for the first time, therefore, CCAs to do integrated resource plans, which they file with the Public Utilities Commission. And prior to this, the way that we did resource planning was with the IOUs, and the CCA load was built into that. But now we'll have the opportunity to have the CCAs do that IRPs. And again, that'll be a great opportunity for you all to think about your resources, what you want to optimize, and particularly collectively how we're working towards that greenhouse gas reduction target. So it's very exciting.
Very good. Yeah, I think having talked to a number of people with regard to community choice energy and concerns about the PCIA and maybe other charges, come down to three. One is, I think most of them are concerned about transparency and how that calculation was developed. The other is, I think we all know that there's a history here. There's things that the investor-owned utilities have done at times, and even required legislation to stop them from doing let alone trying to pass propositions that fail and legislation that has not moved forward. And the other is, of course, your job is to make sure that utilities are kept whole. I would just say the PUC's job, number one, is to make sure that utilities don't go out of business.
I would not say it's not our main job. Our main job is to have safe, affordable, reliable power, and if having a healthy utility helps with that, yes. But to be really clear, what our responsibilities are in relation to CCAs is to make sure that CCAs are operating responsibly and that you're being treated fairly. And I want to really emphasize this treated fairly part, as we noted, that's not always been the case. And it's not my job to promote or encourage utilities, and it's not my job to promote or encourage CCAs. But we do need to make sure that those basic tenets are followed. And so on the treated fairly part, there has been a lot of progress over the last few years, and particularly with the creation of the Code of Conduct. Now we're also requiring to do audits of the Code of Conduct compliance by the utilities. So we're doing our first audit right now with the State Controller's Office of PG&E's compliance with the Code of Conduct. I expect to see that report out later this year. And so it really frustrates me personally. I was on Turn's board when the proposition movement happened, to see how some of those initiatives got played out. But I think we need to move forward and use the laws and the rules that we have in order to make sure that there's fair competition. And so, as there is evidence, if you see something coming up where you're not being treated fairly, bring that to the PUC. PUC staff, on more than one occasion, has followed up to make sure that the marketing has been fair, to pull back unfair marketing, and that's important to us. And so I do want to make sure that you are aware that that is important for us and that that's a standard we're holding utilities to. But we can only know what's going on when you tell us. And so part of that is being actively engaged. MCE has been great around that. I'm sure they can use the support of Sonoma and Lancaster and all of you now that are pursuing CCAs.
Thank you. I'm very glad that you're at the commission.
Thank you for letting me interrupt you, but I wanted to make that.
Let's change topics just a little bit. Still with regard to community choice energy. Question from the audience. How can CCE accelerate the uptake of electric vehicle mobility service?
CCS can actually be progressive because they work within the city and they work within a framework that's really manageable within the community. So I would say the zero net energy funds, be very progressive. Why not have Title 24 require zero net energy new construction right from the get-go? There's no excuse not to do that. And go further. Have all the houses be pre-wired for electric vehicles, allowing the customer to participate in demand response programs where if there's an aggregator, they can actually utilize their car's storage in a battery. So having these abilities to be able to integrate the cars, and hey, sell the cars with every new house that a person buys. The CCA can own the fuel, the CCA can own the batteries, buying down the cost of the vehicle right from the get-go. I mean, we were floating a theory, wouldn't it be nice to be able to give everybody a free car? And say, you get a free car, it's an electric car, it's made in the USA, and it has specific parameters, but you can keep it for free, and you're going to pay a monthly fee for maintenance from your utility. This can be a utility job, whether the CCA does it or the utility. But the utility or the CCA is the fuel provider and owner of that fuel, because by buying the battery, technically you're buying part of the fuel 20 years from now. So own the battery after you take it out of the car still has an 80% of its useful life left. Take that battery, put it in demand response to some storage application somewhere in the CCA, give the customer a new battery as part of the maintenance of the program, and if the customer meets specific parameters of operating that car on a daily basis, they buy down that fee that they pay to the utility. So you can have a free car that you operate almost free because you're providing grid services. And that car can pay for itself. I mean, you can come up with a formula that actually can do that. It would be nice, and I think the CCAs would be able to do it and accelerate the deployment of electric vehicles with new fuels. That would be a good vision to have, wouldn't it?
So I do think there's a way for CCAs to support transportation electrification. I'm not exactly sure what that is. And programmatically, we've just started engaging with our investor-owned utilities on how they engage in transportation electrification. SB 350 also directed us to direct the utilities to file transportation electrification plans. It does not direct us to direct CCAs to do the same. Some of you may be aware that we adopted 2 decisions in the last 2 months at the CPUC for pilots for the investor-owned utilities to install electric vehicle charging in their territories. And I think that if you're a CCA customer, you can be eligible, for example, to have access to that charging. But I was just asking this question, having this thought this week about, well, what exactly, do we have any regulatory direction or authority for CCAs to actively engage in transportation electrification? In spaces like energy efficiency, for example, we do. We now have the opportunity, if you're a CCA, that you can have access to the energy efficiency ratepayer funds that are from CCA customers and apply to be an energy efficiency program administrator. There's not the same clear role on the transportation electrification side. So I'm very interested in hearing how CCAs would like to engage in this space. We have a different regulatory role when it relates to CCAs, and so, but if there's something that that you want to do that we have to have some buy-in to or some consultation on, bring these ideas forward, because I do think that this is the critical area for us to be working on. And to Angelina's point, one of the things that's exciting about the CCA model is the local interaction and the ability, if you're already out there and you're marketing distributed generation and energy efficiency in multifamily dwellings and workplaces, adding electrification, transit electrification to that discussion makes a lot of sense. And so I would like to support you in your plans to do that. You also have the flexibility, though, to do things without our authority, and that can be, that nimbleness can be wonderful. And so if you do pursue programs, please keep us posted about what you're doing. We're at the commission really trying to understand over the next few years what types of outreach and marketing and promotions for customers get them excited about electric vehicles, and we'd love to continue to work with you on those initiatives.
And just to add, as we saw from Russ Hancock's presentation, 45% of greenhouse gases is actually due to transportation. So it's imperative to tackle the energy and the transportation issue together. And of course, large vehicles are very important too. So trucks, school buses being electrified is also very important. Postal vehicles being electrified is also very important. Vehicles that have a short range, that are in the communities, that are otherwise spewing pollution, why not convert them very quickly? CCAs can do it. Utilities haven't been very successful, and I know that the ISO is very interested in working with CCAs on vehicle-to-grid infrastructure, so we would like to have CCAs participate in that program and allow to aggregate those technologies to be developed for providers.
Let me ask you another question from the audience. This individual says, CSI, I assume that's California Solar Initiative, was a success in driving down cost of photovoltaic. We need the same for storage. So what can the PUC, California Public Utilities Commission, do to promote the adoption of behind-the-meter battery storage? I'll take that one first.
Sure. It's always easy to answer a question when you know you're already doing something. So we have the self-generation incentive program has also been a complementary incentive program that incentivizes behind-the-meter storage, and it continues to do so. Also, one of the things that we're working on as part of the broader energy storage proceeding is looking at some of the opportunities for community-scale storage, which could be behind-the-meter or in front of the meter, as well as exploring multi-use applications for storage. And one of the things that's fascinating about energy storage assets are that you can use them for multiple things, sometimes in the same day. And so you can have an asset like a behind-the-meter energy storage that a customer might install because they want to manage their bill. They might want to help them manage their demand charges. But also, those assets could be aggregated and could also be a resource for the utility and the distribution system. But we don't have rules in place to be able to do that, because it sounds good in theory, but you still have to figure out which obligation has primacy. You know, if the utility wants it, the customer wants it, who dominates? And is it the same service that you're compensating twice? And so there's lots of questions. And the ISO has been great in terms of its initiatives this year to think about how to allow distribution level and customer side energy storage or solar projects to be aggregated and used at the wholesale level. And so we're starting to have that conversation. But I think what will ultimately help behind-the-meter storage will be being able to maximize and identify, monetize, and maximize these different revenue streams. Because I think one of the challenges is right now, the economics necessarily don't pan out for some of the behind-the-meter energy storage. If you're on the commercial side, you're dealing with high demand charges, yes. But on the residential side, not so much. Now that can change over time as we introduce time-of-use prices in 2019. As more opportunities come up for bill arbitrage, you can see some combinations with solar PV. And so I do think over the next few years, we're going to see a lot of movement in this area. And so I think what the CPUC needs to continue to do is provide the base incentives for these behind-the-meter projects, but more importantly, work to flesh out the economic framework for making them viable without subsidies.
Thank you, Ms. Galiteva. Let me ask you a different question about storage. Don't we need to shift the policy focus away from grid instability and the duck curve to grid interdependence among renewables, batteries, and other storage, and the IOU/ISO grid? What are your thoughts on how best to do this?
Like I said before, everybody needs to be good grid play. Reliability is paramount. I mean, if we don't have a reliable grid, everything that we're talking about starts getting a different nuance. So reliability is actually our job number one. We don't want to have power outages. We don't want to have blackouts and brownouts. On the other hand, we do want to be able to incorporate all the new technologies, and we want to incorporate them seamlessly and be able to do that. So the interplay between the distribution grid and the transmission grid is important. We need to have, like I said, regional collaboration, but also vertical collaboration. We as the ISO need to be able to see all the way into the distribution grid. We don't want to be a distribution grid operator, but we have to have the visibility, because with all the demand response and with all the distributed generation coming on the distribution grid, that has a ripple effect into transmission. So being able to go all the way down into the customer and witness and know what's going on and facilitate the application of technologies that are going to be able to participate, like Carla mentioned, in the ISO wholesale market becomes much more beneficial, much easier, and much more transparent for us to be able to forecast loads and to be able to match generation and load requirements. And match it not only with the traditional generation, but also efficiency, storage, and demand response, which is very, very critical, because these are all new technologies, and hopefully a fleet of electric cars that are plugged in at any given moment participating in the market. So it's exciting, it's new, and it's something we all need to be working together on from both the technological and the regulatory.
Very good. So, Mr. Peterman, I have a question for you, and then I think we're trying to do a little wrap up here. Let's see. What do you see as the key next steps for the CPUC to set clear standards for CCAs so we can contribute to the stable grid?
Well, I think the PCIA workshop next week will be a good start, because that seems to be the primary issue that there's some concerns around in terms of fair rules. And then going forward, there's a more robust discussion about what are the other critical issues that we need to address at the CPUC and what's the right forum for that. I think what's challenging at times there's issues that come up regularly in different proceedings, and commissioners handle them in different ways. And so if there are issues that are so cross-cutting that they need to be elevated out of these proceedings individually into a broader proceeding, that's worth talking about.
So, ladies, we have just a few minutes left. I'd like to ask each of you if you'd just like to make some closing comments, anything that you want to emphasize that you maybe didn't get to. If you would just take a few minutes and give us your thoughts. I always like to close that way so you have an opportunity to go last year.
Thank you so much, and thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion. I would actually recognize the state of California. The governor has been incredibly progressive. First of all, I'm appointing people like my Carla to the boards, because I have actually were actually voices, but also the state has taken an incredible role in terms of AB 32 and SB 350, bringing in more renewables and having a commitment. We've done the Under 2 MOU, and the Under 2 MOU is a commitment that we are not going to go above 2 degrees. And that was actually launched before Paris, and there were signing ceremonies in Paris. It was on the subnational level. The governor, with some of his German colleagues, basically decided, look, we're going to make the coalition of the willing work on a federal level. Let's make it work on a subnational level. In states like California, the 6th largest economy in the world, has a moral obligation to show an example. So that we launched it together. The Under 2 MU has been incredibly successful, over 140 participants, 400 trillion in assets participating, and this is a commitment that, if you read the answer in the back of the book, in the energy field, is 100% renewable energy. Because you can't get to the 2% or the 1.5% limit without going 100% renewable energy. And it's an overwhelmingly successful and supported document that, yes, it is voluntary, but it pushed Paris. And it was recognized as one of the documents and one of the initiatives that actually drove the development. So what we're doing here, collaborating, CCAs participating, and the utilities and the CCAs can work together. The ISO can work with everybody. We can do it regionally. We just have to have the vision. We have to have the long-term commitment, consistency, transparency, longevity, and fairness across the board. And what we do here is a matrix approach is taken and used everywhere. It can be replicated in Eastern Europe, where they don't have a good grid infrastructure and actually are developing new ones. We can show them the way. It can be leapfrogged into sub-Saharan Africa, where they have no infrastructure whatsoever because this is the best solution. And we can quickly bring in electrification, electric transportation, education to the kids, and doctors across borders with the internet. We can do it as a package. So our role is not only local reliability, low cost, and high value. We can do this. Our role is also global. And we should know that this is the case, and we should be proud of it, because you know what? Not many can do it, and being able to affect change on a global scale, now that's awesome.
The last word.
Thank you. Well, as Angelina has so eloquently discussed and referenced, our energy system is changing, and the different roles of the different parts of the grid that at times are very distinct, generation, transmission, distribution, are changing, and the walls are blending. And I think what's interesting about the opportunity you have if you're interested in CCA is that you're engaging on the generation side, but you're also the closest to the customer. And it's been interesting to watch CCAs develop and as they try to manage those two different roles. I think your presence is healthy. I think it's been challenging the investor-owned utilities in terms of what they do and what is their core competency and how they engage with this customer that has for a long time only had a relationship with them. One area the Commission is going in regardless is with a more customer-oriented approach to energy management and energy delivery. We're having customers come in and say, we want to actively engage with the grid. And so we're looking for utilities, CCAs, to be a part of that interface to help us. Because as was noted earlier, we are a statewide agency where we're responsible for the utility services that are provided to over 30 million people. So we do need you to help identify what makes sense for your local area. But also to keep one eye on these larger state plans and these global plans. How's what you're doing integrating into our goals to reduce GHGs and to have a safe, reliable grid. And my final message would be the CPUC is here for support. I was just talking with Will about there's a different set of questions that come from established CCAs than from those who are just trying to consider whether you want to enter into this market. At times the PUC can seem a little opaque. It is not intentional, but it's an artifact, I think, of being over 100 years old and having rules built on top of rules. So if there's something that you don't understand, drop someone an email and people will get back to you. We've got some very dedicated public servants who are happy to have you at the table. And I look forward to seeing what you do over the next few years. So thank you.